Hello, a very warm welcome to this video. So I'm doing this video right now to just make clear why are we teaching defensive black magic as opposed to primarily kind of offensive black magic. Though some of what I say might well be applicable to both. But I thought some explanation as to why there will be a focus on defensive black magic was needed, particularly as kind of many in the satanic community do indeed practice offensive black magic. And I'll be explaining some of the problems essentially with that. So, firstly, kind of in often kind of in satanic practices, if you want something, you might well end up doing a bit of black magic, which might well unintentionally result in essentially when you're trying to cause something to happen, it might hinder something happening for somebody else, and that might be essentially accidentally you almost being on the offense because you are doing something that is essentially potentially resulting in challenge for them. Not that that's a bad thing. Challenges are good, and we do this kind of thing in daily life anyway. Even apart from magic, whenever we do an action, it will have both positive and not so positive impacts. That's kind of inevitable. Nothing that we do will be beneficial for everyone in the entire world in all ways. Like when you go to a shop to buy something, you're helping that shop, but you're not then helping another shop that might well actually need a bit of financial support. So there's nothing that we do that can kind of be completely removed from accidental negative effects. And I say far less commonly, but I would say less commonly is kind of often kind of in Satanism, people will talk about having essentially the right to respond essentially an eye for an eye. So essentially if somebody attacks you with black magic, you can respond likewise. And sometimes in the satanic community, people do, well, like I say, all magic can be used for good or not so good, and some people might well attempt to use it for things where, they might use it to affect the lives of others in not so positive ways necessarily. As I say, none of this should be taken as fact. This is only my experience on the satanic community. And therefore I do think, because black magic will affect one's life, and one can use black magic to affect one's own life and the lives of others positively, but also black magic might well end up having potentially negative impact in terms of the black magic practice by others on your own life. Potentially, as I say, it might not, but because it might, we live in a world where there are lots of people wanting lots of different things, some of which might well conflict with what you want. And some people do use black magic as a weapon. And I'll be exploring why I am suggesting using black magic in response to that in a defensive manner, as opposed to using it offensively. Now, kind of Christians would often say, essentially love your neighbour, but I think there's a more pressing problem to responding offensively to kind of black magic attacks. And this is the diagram I've shown here. So essentially, the logic that responding to black magic with offensive black magic follows is essentially this. So somebody inadvertently or kind of perhaps with darker intent does end up through the use of black magic causing challenge, difficulty, or even potentially suffering. And a potential response, and possibly fairly human response to that, is to respond, in a similar manner. And this probably originates from the fact that, originally, if you didn't, you might be considered as weak and unable to defend yourself, in which case people might well take advantage of you, or particularly if you're the leader of a tribe or something, might take advantage of your tribe. So though it's not the best response to have, it is an understandable response. The problem with that, with actually acting on such a potential response, is then if one responds in a similar manner by reciprocating the actions of the person that has caused kind of challenges or potentially even suffering, by offensively performing black magic and causing them suffering, is then you cause pain and suffering. And so they're going to respond, well, someone has caused pain and suffering, and they're going to respond in a similar manner. And so essentially you create this loop where the exact same psychology you used to respond to what they're doing, because you class it as morally wrong, now suddenly you're doing that exact same thing in response, and so you'll be classed as doing the morally wrong thing, and they'll respond likewise, and this kind of cycle will continue, and essentially it will result in essentially mutual destruction, because this kind of pattern essentially means both people are essentially in doing destructive things, and it's very hard to say at the end of the day who's right or who's wrong. I think the conclusion is, well, both are in the wrong by the end of it and are really destroying each other, and therefore this psychology of responding with an eye for an eye essentially is inadvisable for the person who might have been negatively affected by black magic, as well as for the person who actually did the black magic to begin with. And so essentially one should never respond offensively to black magic with offensive black magic. And that is why I will not really be covering much offensive black magic, because I do believe it is a cycle to complete destruction and is no good for anyone. So how should one respond? Well, there are essentially two main ways. I mean, firstly, as the Christian suggests, essentially show a loving hand. And I think in a lot of cases this works quite well, particularly as often black magic attacks are caused accidentally. Other times they're caused by simply a misunderstanding, and they can easily be resolved by essentially one just showing the loving hand and resolving it entirely peacefully. An alternate thing to do, and sometimes the only possible thing to do really, depending on the situation, is defensive black magic. And defensive black magic is something I'll be talking about extensively. And basically, defensive black magic is essentially how to protect oneself from spirits with perhaps dark intent, or other practitioners who might well have darker intents, or might just accidentally do something that might have an undesirable effect for yourself or for other people you know. And therefore, essentially, it's about how to do kind of spiritual practices safely. It's, you know, as I say, it's not something, you know, one really needs to worry about all that much. It's just important to have kind of defensive magic in one's tool belt in the very rare eventuality where it is actually necessary to employ. So this is essentially why it is, you know, important to respond with defensive black magic in certain situations, and I would really stress, because I do believe something that, you know, is very useful in Judeo-Christian theology that should be applied in Satanism is forgiveness, for the reasons I've discussed, because often forgiveness is a road to healing, but where forgiveness can't be done, or whilst forgiveness is in the process of working, defensive black magic is useful. But I would really like to use this as an opportunity to essentially beg the Satanic community to perhaps revise some of their kind of, you know, some traditional approaches in the Satanic community in terms of an eye for an eye. Not that every Satanist follows that, but I do strongly believe that an eye for an eye is an awful idea. Absolutely awful. Because it results in a cycle of mutual destruction. And therefore, you know, essentially, whilst there's, you know, nothing wrong with selfishness in the Satanic community, I would like to say, well, forgive for oneself, you know, and this can be applied generally elsewhere in life. Essentially, forgiveness is about the person who's been negatively affected by somebody else's intentional or unintentional actions. It's about healing. Forgiveness is a massive part of healing, and one should always respond to anything bad that happens by forgiveness. Very, very important to do that, because that is the only road to healing and solving the problem in a kind of mature fashion. But, you know, I would probably depart from Judeo-Christian thought in saying, in cases where that isn't possible or is in the process of happening, defensive magic might well be useful. And so I'll cover defensive magic here. And as I say, also there are beings you might work with where not that you will, you know, there's no need to be terrified of them, but definitely, you know, having, you know, like just a shield, magical shield, if you like, metaphorically, to put up at times might be helpful. It depends really on essentially on how things are going and everything. As I say, there aren't really any beings with malicious intent, but some just, some perhaps a little darker than others. Because there are many spirits. But I will mainly be teaching defensive magic. If you are interested in offensive magic, I feel it is my duty to also kind of point you in a direction there. Given, you know, it is completely your choice whether you choose to practice offensive magic or not. But if you would like to learn offensive magic, How to Become a Living God.com by E.A. Koetting is really good for that. Although E.A. Koetting is also good for kind of ritualistic practices apart from that, but E.A. Koetting will talk more about offensive black magic than I will. I know this has been a rather kind of serious topic, but I thought this was important to bring up. particularly considering some of the material that will be discussed concerning black